Aloha, welcome to this very brief introduction to database implementation. Actually, it's such a huge topic that really all I want to do is just give you some pointers to the things that we're going to be talking about through all the experiences and readings in this module. I don't know how to give you anything concise other than kind of a conceptual map for what we're going to be doing. So at the highest level, we've been talking about the model view controller design pattern several times during the semester. Here it is again. And what you're seeing here is that we need a way to persist the model that we've implemented in the models package. And in this module, what we're going to do is learn how to use PostgreSQL. For doing that, that's a very convenient choice. The reason why I chose that particular one is because it's provided by default in Heroku. So the transition from having a system that runs locally on your computer to having one deployed to Heroku is really very easy when you're using the same database for both local and remote. Okay, so there's our model view controller. And so specifically when we're talking about implementation, the first thing you have to learn how to do is to install PostgreSQL on your computer. That could be challenging, particularly if you're like me who is running a Macintosh with an older version of the operating system. Set aside at least a couple days, I think, to make sure you get PostgreSQL running. It's not going to be super simple for some of you. This is one of those few cases where I'd say probably the Windows people have it a little easier than the Mac people. Well, you'll also be learning to use an object relational manager called EBean. The 800-pound gorilla in this space is called Hibernate, and we'll be using EBean, which is a little different, in some ways a little simpler than Hibernate, but they share a lot of common functionality. So if you learn EBean, then transitioning to Hibernate later on will be pretty easy. They both use basically the same kinds of annotations on the Java class objects. So that part of it is shared, but the query language is going to be different. And then the most important, one of the big things is, how is it that you configure Play to use PostgreSQL as a backing store? Actually, that's pretty trivial. But then, how do you actually set up your domain model to get that persistency is going to be more challenging. And then the final aspect is pushing it out to Heroku. That'll be quite easy, actually, as you'll see. PostgreSQL. They call it the world's most popular open source database. I don't know if that's true, or I guess they call it the world's most advanced open source database, which is a little different from most popular. But it is quite popular, and it is quite fast for a relational database system. So I think it's well worth your time to become familiar with this database. It's always there is a command line client called PSQL, which is useful for basically creating databases, but then populating a database with tables and so forth, and understanding the contents of the database requires some kind of client. And there's a pgadmin 3, which is a client for Postgres, but after playing around, what I've realized is really the best client is IntelliJ. Okay, they have a very nice client, and what's nice about using IntelliJ as your database client is that if later on you're working with MySQL or some other kind of database, you can use the IntelliJ IDEA client for all of the different databases. And so by learning this user interface, not only will it be comfortable for you because it's what you've used before, but then you can reuse this learning when you move to different databases in the future. And here's a screenshot of it, and it's quite intuitive. We will be using the EBean ORM, and this is in some ways just like all the other object relational managers, in that what you're going to be doing is using these JPA annotations. You can see an @entity annotation in here right on this line, and then you can see an @ID annotation to make this ID into a primary key, and then we have a relationship here @many-to-one, which describes how entities of class contact map to entities of class user info. Okay, and so that's very common. You can see Java x.persistence. So these are very standardized annotations for how you express the relationship between your Java classes and the underlying relational database tables. Okay, and so whether you're using EBean or Hibernate or whatever you're using, that part of it is going to generally be about the same. Where things get different with EBean is the query language that you use to actually retrieve these, make queries on the underlying relational database and then construct Java objects that you actually manipulate. And in general, what you're going to be returning is either an individual instance of an entity or a Java class, or maybe some list of Java classes. That's, for our purposes in this class, that's probably what you'll be doing. And you can see this is what the query language looks like. You're going to want a user info object. That's what you want to get back, and you call this find method, which is you'll define it in the user info class, but it's kind of this boilerplate EBean code. And then that supplies a bunch of different methods which allow you to kind of construct this query-like instance. In this case, you're going to say you want to find a user info object where the email field in the object is equal to the passed-in string, and then we want to guarantee that there's only one of those objects, or no objects, or at least no more than one of those objects that are in the table, and then we'll return that single instance, or null if no, we didn't find anything like that. Okay, so that's what EBean query language looks like, and there's a bunch of different methods that you can chain together to create various kinds of queries. Okay, then configuring play, pretty easy. There's the build.sbt file needs to be changed, the application.conf file needs to be changed, I go through it in the experiences, and it's not too hard to do. You can see what it looks like right here. Okay, so that's my brief kind of overview of things. We're going to be talking about PostgreSQL. You need a client. We're going to deploy to Heroku, and we're going to be using this object relational manager to map our domain model that's in the models package to underlying database tables. So enjoy this. Conceptually, there's some things you gotta, there's some hurdles involved with this module, but I think if you spend the time and do the WODs, you'll come out of it with a pretty good understanding of how this all works.